we have two guests to discuss the situation in Libya. Joining us by Skype from Amman in Jordan is Samah Hadid, Regional Head of Advocacy, Media and Communications for the Middle East Regional Office for the Norwegian Refugee Council. Samah, thank you very much for being with us. Here in the studio, Leila Jacinto, our International Affairs Editor. Samah, can I start by getting an update from you as to where your people are at, what they are trying to do to help matters in Libya?
Well, our teams are on the ground and they're reporting a dire and catastrophic situation. We're seeing now the full impacts of the floods, and the needs are huge. People need food, water, shelter, but we're also worried about the potential health crisis that may emerge because of the bodies that are being uncovered from the wreckage, and local search and rescue workers are working around the clock to uncover these bodies, but they're filling the streets. So there's a race against time to prevent a further health crisis from emerging. The needs are widespread and they're absolutely huge.
Samah, it sounds like a nightmare situation. Please bear with me. I'll bring in Leila Jacinto, our International Affairs Editor, for a comment now. Leila, 3 days since the dams in Derna burst, causing, as we've seen, as we've been reporting, unprecedented devastation. The questions are now being raised over the Libyan authorities' emergency preparation and response.
Absolutely. And this afternoon, the UN's World Meteorological Organization, the WMO chief, held a press conference in Geneva, and he basically addressed some of the issues and allegations that have been circulating on social media over the past few days. Now, I mean, remember, this disaster that we are seeing is a perfect storm of crises. You have climate change, and then you have also the political crisis. Another thing to remember is that this flooding is the effect of Storm Daniel, which battered Turkey, Bulgaria, and Greece before coming down into the Mediterranean, into Libya. So at the press conference, the WMO chief basically said that if normal systems were operating in Libya, the worst of this disaster could have been averted. And basically, he addressed two issues, which was early warning and evacuation. And his exact words were there was no evacuation taking place because there was no proper early warning. Now, when it comes to warning, I've been speaking to Libyans, many of my Libyan friends who have family in Derna. Now, the Libyan National Weather Center did issue a warning 72 hours before the storm hit, and alerting authorities to take the necessary measures. The people who have family in Derna are painting a picture of complete confusion in the 48 hours before the dams burst. Apparently, on Saturday, the appointed mayor of Derna announced that there would be an evacuation, but there were no details. There were no orders given about the evacuation. There was some talk about the coastal areas being evacuated, which in hindsight was not necessary because the damage was not done from the sea coast. It was done when the dams broke, and it's the area from the dam to the coast. In any case, there was no evacuation order given. The next day, on Sunday afternoon, the authorities issued an overnight curfew. And so when the dams burst at 2:30 early Monday morning, Libyans, Dernawis, were at home because they were asked to stay at home. And then there's also, and Dernawis were very aware that these two dams were fragile. And so there's talk now about, could there have been some sort of controlled water outflow of the lake behind the dam to sort of decrease the pressure? That would have, that would have taken some evacuations because the Wadi Derna, this river valley, runs through the city with no embankments. But there could have been measures taken. And what people are really asking for is an investigation, but they don't really think that they will have a credible investigation because of the political situation.
Indeed, Leila, thank you very much indeed. Samah, can I bring you back in, please? Samah Hadid from the Norwegian Refugee Council, your people working on the ground, facing massive problems. And clearly, one could have evacuated and probably saved people. That's a possibility. One could have perhaps strengthened the dam if one had had the political will and the resources to do so. But what we're dealing with now is a massive disaster and your people on the ground. How urgently do you need to get more help into areas like Derna? What is the extent of what you're trying to do there? And if you don't get things in there as quickly as you can, and you've mentioned already the problem of secondary infection, even a cholera outbreak as a possibility there, is that what you fear?
We do fear for the worst, and that's why we're working to scale up our response. Part of the impact of this has been the people who've been displaced from the flooding. At least 30,000 have been displaced, but the number in reality could be much, much higher. So we're prioritizing our support for those who are displaced in collective shelters in around the affected areas. And we're working to provide food, other items, psychosocial support, and shelter support for those who have been displaced. I mean, Libya also has been chronically underfunded for years. Humanitarian aid to the country has been consistently cut. And it's a country that has faced displacement, conflict, and impoverishment. So we're appealing to the international community to step up its support to meet the emergency needs, but also to support Libya recover in the long term. The recovery effort from this flooding will take a lot of time, and so we need international donors to maintain their support to allow Libyans to rebuild their lives.
Samah, a sign in Libya that in some way the crisis is leading to an element of unity between East and West, which have been more or less at war for the past 10 years. Are you sensing that this in some way is going to help this aid, if and when it comes in, get to the people who need it?
Well, we're definitely seeing support amongst the people of Libya and volunteers who are trying to support the aid effort, mobilizing efforts on the ground, local responders really working around the clock to support those in need. So that's been a very positive sign. But we do need all authorities, all stakeholders, local authorities and international support to really focus on ensuring that aid gets to those who need it immediately, and that we can maintain some stability so that this area and the people affected can recover.
Can I bring back in that Leila Jacinto in our International Affairs Editor? In terms of this issue of the disunity, the lawlessness, you intimated earlier that there's people saying that this has been years and years of neglect, problems like that. What are the people saying about the authorities?
Actually, it's very interesting when you mentioned unity, because on social media, for instance, there are the people calling for investigations, asking questions, and then there's a backlash of people saying, this is not the time for politics. This is the time for unity. I mean, the one thing that you really have to understand, Mark, is how traumatized the population is. I mean, we're talking about a city with a population of 85,000 in a country of 7 million. So there are so many Libyans who have family in Derna, who have family history in Derna and loved ones in Derna. The trauma is immense. So there is really a feeling of shock. And when it comes to, this question of should hard questions be asked, or is this a time for unity? And these discussions can get unnecessarily bitter on social media, because the truth is it's not an either or. Obviously, this is a time for unity. Obviously, this is a time for the international community and Libyans to come together. But in order for the aid to work, questions have to be asked, because if these questions are not addressed, how are we going to address the issue of aid reaching the countries? Much less talk about the reconstruction that is necessary. Now, as you know, Libya is divided between parallel administrations in the east, mostly controlled by General Khalifa Haftar's quote-unquote Libyan National Army, and the internationally recognized government in the western Libya. Now, the authorities in western Libya have asked the UN to coordinate these operations. But, there are so many militias, the central command, there's no central command. And there are some ministers in the east talking about declaring Derna city a military zone and controlling access for civilians, including the press inside. And through the years since I've been covering Libya, I hear a lot of Libyans say, the international media is not covering what's happening in eastern Libya. And I tell them, do you know how difficult it is for the press to get into eastern Libya? So, what is needed is also transparency and accountability, for which you need press.
Let me put that to Samah Hadid. Samah, in terms of what you're trying to do, and clearly your work is essential, completely. Our work's important. Your work's essential right now, essential. Getting in there, getting the access, it's bad enough getting through all the damage, but getting through all the other problems too. Are you having issues with that?
There are always logistical challenges, particularly when you're dealing with a disaster of this scale and magnitude. The problem has also been that local responders have been personally and directly affected by the disaster. So mobilizing that initial local response takes time in a context like this. But I think the clear message here is that we need to ensure that all resources get to the ground as fast as possible, and that people in need of aid, urgent aid, get the support that's required. And that does mean quick and fast visas for international aid workers to support the local aid effort as much as possible, because this disaster of this size requires a huge scaled up response.
Samah Hadid, thank you very much indeed for joining us there from Amman in Jordan, from the Norwegian Refugee Council, the regional head of Advocacy, Media and Communications. Thank you again, Samah, and thank you to Leila Jacinto, our international affairs editor, for your take. Thank you very much indeed. We'll bring you more, of course, on the situation in Libya as it develops. We can obviously tell you that on the ground, as we heard from Samah Hadid, the struggle continues to bring help to those who need it. And clearly questions will be asked about why this became such a massive, massive humanitarian disaster.